Right. I latched onto the reference to people coming in to do volunteer work from the outside. Is this a sort of savage indictment of our own society and that the NGO culture must persist? We need NGOs, we need outsiders to come and look after our own. Is this how you see things?
I think it's a case of infrastructure in this country. It's a case of there are a lot of people that can assist society and aid society, but everybody is a lot of people have just sort of cocooned themselves in their own comfort zone, that they don't want to get involved in helping the less fortunate in this country.
But I say that pointedly because one of the criticisms of Kenyans to Kenyans is that we are not interested in the humanitarian philanthropic angle. And if we are, it's quite purely to the African extended family. I will help my cousin in the village, I'll help my auntie in the village, but I won't help the street kid. Having come back home, is that how you view us, as a returning prodigal daughter?
I think that a lot of the attitudes of Kenyans is to do with fear. It's fear-based. Why should I get involved? You know, somebody's going to blame me if something goes wrong. You know, you find when people are injured on the street, maybe you've been run down by a car or knocked down by a car, a lot of people won't stop and help. Why? Because if I'm rushing that person to hospital and they die at the back of my car, I'm the one who's going to get blamed. Well, that's the wrong attitude. You're somebody who wants to help somebody. So there's that fear of, I'm going to get blamed.
Well, there are many issues that you're raising here. They've got to do with the whole idea of policing, the way that we look at our cops in the same way that one might not look at the British Bobby. This is, and it will take time, but that's the topic for another conversation. I want to go back to what you do, and you mentioned earlier on that you came to Pokot, and you witnessed firsthand the practice of FGM, female genital mutilation. Now, we respond to this with shock and horror and saying it's bad, but without knowing quite what we are condemning. What is the reality of encountering FGM? Again, I'll explain myself, because men will sit back quite smugly and say there is an operation for men called male circumcision, where the foreskin is removed. It's a rite of masculinity, and those who don't go through it are complete and utter wimps. So why shouldn't there be a moral equivalent for women?
Right. Before I qualified as a medical practitioner, I qualified as an anthropologist. And the anthropologist in me says that every culture has the right to practice its culture, right? So as an anthropologist, I would say FGM is part of somebody's culture. Who am I to question it? Who am I to go in there with my Western eyes and say that your culture is wrong? But when I encountered FGM, it was purely as a medical practitioner. I went into Pokot and I found that 80% of the young girls and the women that I was seeing had chronic pelvic infections, urine infections. They had cysts, you know, in their womb, and a lot of fistulas, you know, and fistulas are sort of an opening between the vagina and the anus that occurs when your birth canal is too small to deliver a baby. So literally your skin rips apart. Now, I asked myself, why? Why is it that so many women are suffering? So many women are ill? And it was because of FGM. You know, it's because FGM changes their body physically, and it affects.
For those, what is FGM? Is that a silly question to ask you? What is the mutilation?
Female circumcision basically is where you've got part of the external female genitalia that is removed. It's cut off. There are 3 types of circumcisions that are performed. There is something called clitorectomy, where the clitoris is removed. Then the extreme form is infibulation, where the whole external genitalia is cut off and then stitched together. The skin is pulled and stitched together. Now, all of this is done to a girl who's usually 10 years old without any kind of anesthesia, performed by a woman who has absolutely no knowledge of anatomy and surgery, And the little girl is held down by about 10 women who are busy chanting. And a lot of girls will suffer shock. A lot of girls will die. And these are cases that you never hear about. They're just brushed under the rug. You know, you have a high percentage of women who are HIV positive. And they're not HIV positive in Africa because they're promiscuous and they sleep around with men. No, a high percentage of women in Africa are HIV positive because when circumcision is performed, it's performed with one blade that's not sterilized, and you've got up to 20 young girls that are circumcised with the same blade. So you've got cross-infection. So I'm looking at FGM purely from a
medical standpoint.
Right. And I'm saying that, you know, this is not right because it's affecting the health of your women.
Accepted, understood. How does one bring about change? I've been attached to this. This is what, I dare say some of these girls culturally are quite keen on the practice.
Yes, they are.
Because it legitimizes their standing, doesn't it, in society?
Yes. You do find that. If you take a look at FGM and say the Maasai community, you've got girls as young as 10 who are circumcised. Now when these girls go back to school, and not all of them will, when these girls go back to school now, they are classed as an adult. It means that a teacher cannot discipline a child because she's now an adult. And this little child is now at a hierarchy, it's at a higher standing to other children, so they can now boss about. So a lot of girls want to get circumcised because they know that once they are, that's it, nobody can say anything to them. What they don't understand is what happens during a circumcision ceremony, what is going to happen to them. What they don't understand is the shock, the pain that they will go through, the effect that it can have on their life. Girls die of FGM, you know. So they don't understand that.
So you're going back, and you wouldn't make comment on male circumcision and say that is, there's no shock for the young man who's taken to the river in ice cold water. It's a rite of passage.
Right.
And, you know, I have heard, you know, I mean, I'm not being flippant, but people say there's tremendous pain that might accompany a Botox implant to make you more beautiful and stay young forever at the age of 70, 80 or whatever. So people are prepared to go to
extreme lengths.
Right.
Well, with Botox, you know, you can have numbing cream.
Right. Right.
And male circumcision, yes, it's painful, but you don't hear cases of it affecting their health, it affecting their fertility, it affecting them dying of bleeding or shock. And medically done male circumcision has shown to help in reducing cases of cervical cancer.
Right, so,
you know, so there is a
relatively one is
yes,
good,
it's, you
and
know,
one is bad.
Right, because
Okay.
one affects somebody's life, and you know, it's a question of life and death with
Right.
female circumcision.
Right. I think we've got time enough to go back to this idea of the NGO in global sort of empirical terms. Would you argue the case forcefully for the continuance of an NGO culture?
Certainly.
And is Kenya making it simple for it to exist?
Yeah, I mean, certainly you find that there is a great need for humanitarians and NGOs to operate in countries where there is a high need. In Kenya itself, Kenya is one of the most affluent African countries. You don't need an influx of NGOs, it's just that the infrastructure is not there.
And currently, is it easy to set up an NGO in Kenya? Would you say it's hunky-dory?
Well, here's the thing. You've got people like myself, you know, who've dropped affluent practices, dropped practices that where you earn a lot of money, and you've given all of that up to come into a country to help for free, sort of empower a society and communities, right? You're teaching them how to run sustainable projects that is going to help their livelihoods. You're teaching them how to lift themselves up from a life of poverty into a life that is comfortable, where they feel good.
And what is the response to?
Right? And you find the Kenyan government makes it really difficult. You now have to pay 400,000 shillings to come into Kenya to work as an NGO worker. Well, if I'm coming into your country to help lift communities and people for free and plugging in my personal finances to do that, why then is the Kenyan government not supporting that?
Right, well, I guess there are people in the government who are hearing us talk, and maybe that's part of our plan to get this debate out there. There might be an adequate response, and we'll have to find it from somebody else. Now, just one last question. You've spent all these years in the humanitarian field, from riches to rags, as an individual. Is there a message that you would give to the general populace, the Kenyan people?
I would say now something that Mother Teresa said, which was that the greatest disease in this world is not TB or AIDS. It's actually the lack of love. There's a human feeling that everybody wants to be accepted and loved. And it costs absolutely nothing to reach out and show compassion to your fellow Kenyans, be they poor, be they little or large. So the Kenyan people, I would say, is reach out today and uplift somebody's life, you know. Be compassionate. It costs nothing. It's free.
Nav Matharu, osteopath and humanitarian, thank you so much for coming on the JSO
Thank you,
interview.
John.